Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Calimesa Insider Podcast. Will Kolbow here. And we have reached the end of May, the last day of May of 2024. Kids are either out of school or getting out of school soon. And here in the Kolbow household, it's been a pretty crazy couple of weeks. Because if you listen to the first episode of the podcast, you'll know that I have 3 kids, a set of twin boys, and a daughter that's 2 years younger. And so we just celebrated just today, this morning, the promotion of our boys to 9th grade to high school. So they wrapped up 8th grade, and my daughter wrapped up 6th grade. So she'll be heading into intermediate school next year, and my boys, of course, to high school. So a big change coming here in the Kolbow household this summer. And I think that a lot of people go through this kind of, it's a lot of, that happens here at the end of the school year. So no exception here, but this was particularly a big year because this will probably be the only year that we're going to have kind of these milestone celebrations of all 3 of the kids at the same time, because obviously when the boys graduate from high school, our daughter will only be halfway through. So big times happening around here. I did start a new YouTube channel for the podcast. I have turned comments off. And the reason is, of course, because we're a public agency, all of that becomes public record. And, especially with YouTube, you can get, kind of spammy type of comments. And rather than having to manage that, and quite frankly, I don't have time to manage those comments and go through that kind of stuff. And you can't really remove them anyway. And so I think it kind of detracts from the whole experience. So if you do have feedback for me, or you have questions you want me to answer on the podcast, just send me an email. We actually have created an email address. It's calimesainsider@gmail.com for this particular podcast. Or you can just send me an email to my city email address, wkolbow@cityofcalimesa.net. So you can subscribe to the YouTube channel now. It's youtube.com/@Calimesa Insider, the @ sign first, and then Calimesa Insider. Or better, the easier way would be just to search for Calimesa Insider, and you'll probably find it in the first couple of links. So, of course, you can subscribe through your favorite podcast apps, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, to name a few. Now, I'd said at the end of last week's episode that we were going to talk about the Cherry Valley Boulevard interchange. I'm going to be moving that to a future episode. Obviously, one of the reasons is it's not really timely. It's going to be a while before we're actually doing construction there. So we'll be talking that the next few weeks, and the reason you'll figure out why as we go along in the program today. One of the things that I didn't mention last week was that it was Public Works Week. And so our Public Works guys consists of 4 crew members that work extremely hard for the city, and they do everything. They maintain our parks, they maintain our streets, our storm drains, all that kind of stuff. And it's just a mighty crew of 4 that we have. And so we recognized them. We had a little pizza party. We all chipped in for a little pizza party for them. So that was pretty special. To recognize all the work that those guys do. So I just wanted to recognize that here on the podcast as well. They do just a wonderful job with, again, they do a lot with a little, and we really appreciate it. Coming up next Monday is our next council meeting. That'll be Monday, June 3rd. The 3 items on the agenda. One is going to be moved to the 17th. So there was a presentation by the Calimesa Unified School District that will be moved to the June 17th meeting. And then the 2 business items that are on the agenda, aside from the normal consent calendar, are, first of all, the appointment of a council member to the Citizen Recognition Program Committee. We had created that at the last council meeting, but council had deferred their selection of a council member to represent the council on that committee. So it's a 3-person committee, 2 people from the Parks, Trails, and Community Services Commission, and 1 from the City Council will make the selection for the different various categories for people that are nominated in the Citizen Recognition Program. But the big item that we're going to be considering is the fiscal year 25 budget. So we have already had a workshop related to that. So if you want to find out more about that workshop, you can just head over to cityofcalimesa.net, click on agendas and minutes, and you'll be able to see the full agenda packet presenting the budget. It's also in the agenda packet for this coming Monday's meeting. And then also the video presentation. We did a very in-depth dive on the fiscal year 25 budget on the workshop. So we're going to be doing a condensed version of that presentation when we present the budget next week. All right, so let's get into the topic of the day. And first of all, where I want to start with this is, a lot of people wonder how infrastructure gets paid for. Where does my tax money go? Is really the question that is what it starts with. And our primary general fund income or revenue sources are property tax and sales tax. And then we also get several streams of revenue that can be used for that actually not can't be. It must be used for transportation and in particular for roads. And so obviously, people have a perception, and I think it's a reality that they do pay a lot in taxes, and so it pays for various things. The city doesn't get any income tax that you pay, both federal and state, and that's a big chunk of the tax bill that we pay. Property tax, because of Prop 13, can vary greatly. You can have two neighbors, one that pays maybe $600-700 a year in property tax because their assessed value is so low because they've been in their house for 50 years, and their neighbor next to them that just bought their house last year is paying over $5,000 a year. And then if you go into some of our newer developments, there are CFDs that, tack on additional taxes on top of that. So that can vary greatly, even though those are, theoretically paying for the same services. And so, but then you have things like your registration, your car tags, and that's where people start thinking about transportation. They think the biggest things they pay for as far as their, that are supposed to go to the roads are your registration fees and your gas tax. Well, I'm here to tell you, I'm not going to go into the details, but registration fees are actually a form of property tax. Vehicles, if you think about it, boats, RVs, airplanes, and a lot of people have airplanes, but those types of personal property you still pay property tax on those. You pay 1% of the value of those particular types of property. And that is the same applies to cars, but the state realized, it's so hard because of the proliferation of cars. Nearly 100 years ago, they decided, okay, maybe the state should just be the one that administers that and then puts sends the money back to the cities, and that changed over time. But the bottom line is that is considered a property tax. So your registration fees are considered a property tax. So then that leaves you with gas tax. So let's just kind of do a calculation here real quick to kind of guesstimate how much the state would get in total gas tax money. So the average Californian drives about 12,500 miles per year. The average fuel efficiency of cars on the road today is about 20 miles per gallon, and that's just for gas-powered vehicles. That's not considering electric vehicles, meaning the average driver consumes about 625 gallons of fuel per year. And the California gas tax currently is 57.9 cents per gallon. It'll be going up to 59.9 cents a gallon starting on July 1. So that means that the average gas tax paid per driver is about $362. And again, that's assuming everybody drives a gas-powered vehicle. And there's about 28 million licensed drivers in California. So they generate about $9.7 billion in gas tax. And then that is distributed between the state, the counties, and the cities. So that would be the absolute maximum that you would expect to see. But again, because of the proliferation of electric vehicles, that number is going to be lower. The other thing that has happened over time, remember, people look at the rate that you pay per gallon. However, the amount of miles you can drive on that gallon of gas has gotten a lot bigger. If you look at fuel efficiency, maybe back in the 70s or 80s compared to what it is today, you were consuming a lot more gas per mile. So as a result, you were paying, per mile, you're paying more, if you just for both inflation and for fuel efficiency, the levels of gas tax you were paying back then are probably comparable to today, if not more, or actually probably less, because if you adjust for inflation. So obviously the cost of maintaining the roads hasn't done that. It has expanded. And just to give you kind of an idea of that, the cost to repave all of just the state maintained roads, and that's not a majority are county and local roads, it would be well over $100 billion. That's billion with a B, $100 billion. So as you can see, and this is just to pave, this isn't to replace or repair bridges. This isn't to, for any other type of maintenance that needs to be done. And this does also not include any cost of new infrastructure, added lanes, things like that, new roads. So that's where, we do have kind of a gap there. And so I think once you put in that perspective, you see that, maybe, and I think people would be willing to pay more for some things if they got to pay less in others. And so much of our money gets tied up in income tax, which doesn't really come down to the local level. I think that's where the frustration comes in, is that a lot of the tax money that you pay leaves the area and doesn't come back. I think that if more of their tax money stayed local, number one, we'd be able to provide a much higher service level to our community, because I've always believed that local government is really where it's at in terms of, who has the biggest impact on your life from government, who could make the biggest difference. And it certainly is going to be the local governments, because your local roads, your parks, your police, your fire, all that kind of stuff. And so the city of Calimesa, I mentioned that some of that $9.7 billion comes to cities. The city of Calimesa gets about $315,000 in traditional gas tax funds. That's the old gas tax funds. And then we had SB1 that was passed back in 2017. And the city gets about another $275,000 from that. There are certain restrictions on that can be used for pavement rehab, though, and so that's going to be something that comes into play as the years go on. And so the other revenues we get for roads, Riverside County is known as a self-help county, and what that means is that we have a 0.5% sales tax that we've tacked on. That's Measure A, that is to be used specifically for roads. And the city of Calimesa gets a portion of that. Some of that goes to county projects, some of that goes to freeway projects, and some of it goes to the local cities. The city of Calimesa receives about $325,000 from that. So if you combine the three sources, we get a little bit over $900,000 a year for road repair, road maintenance, and road enhancements. And then there's also development impact fees, and that can be used specifically for new infrastructure. It can only be used for new infrastructure. And Calimesa does have a transportation system development impact fee, but Riverside County has something very unique, and it's called the Transportation Uniform Mitigation Fee, and it is a regional development impact fee. So this is something about what we call the TUMF. That's the acronym for the Transportation Uniform Mitigation Fee, TUMF. Regional arterial highways in western Riverside County are forecast to carry significant traffic volumes by 2045. And this is from a study that was prepared recently that I'm going to be telling you about in a little bit here. While some localized fee programs exist to mitigate the local impacts of new development on the transportation system in specific areas, and while these programs are effective locally, they are insufficient in their ability to meet the regional demand for transportation infrastructure. Former Riverside County Supervisor Bob Buster recognized the need to establish a comprehensive funding source to mitigate the cumulative regional transportation impacts of new development on regional arterial highways. The need to establish a comprehensive funding source for arterial highway improvements has evolved into the development of the TUMF for western Riverside County. And so in February of 1999, cities in southwestern Riverside County, those are Temecula, Murrieta, and Lake Elsinore, along with the Western Riverside Council of Governments, or WRCOG, the RCTC, Riverside County Transportation Commission, and the Building Industry Association met to discuss the concept of a TUMF. In May of 2000, the idea of a TUMF began to be being discussed in cities in northwestern Riverside County. And then in August 2000, WRCOG took the lead in looking to establish a single program to ensure consistency throughout the region. So WRCOG is a regional council of governments that consists of 18 cities in western Riverside County, the Riverside County Board of Supervisors, Eastern Municipal Water District, and Western Municipal Water District. Calimesa's representative on WRCOG is currently Mayor Pro Tem Wendy Hewitt. And so the executive committee, which Mayor Pro Tem Hewitt is part of, consists of one elected official from each member city or district and the 4 county supervisors that represent areas within Western Riverside County. And they meet the first Monday of every month at 2 p.m. at the Riverside County Boardroom, and the meetings are also streamed online. So those are public meetings that the public can check out at any time. By the way, Coachella Valley also has a similar setup for the cities down in Coachella Valley. It's called the Coachella Valley Association of Government, or CVAG. So in November of 2002, the initial TUMF Nexus Study is completed and adopted by WRCOG. And at the same time, there was an extension of Measure A. Measure A was originally passed in 1988, and then it was extended for another 30 years to 2039 in 2002, because the original Measure A would have expired in 2009. This extension was approved at the same time, but it also required cities to participate in the TUMF program to receive Measure A funds. Because basically, I think the voters wanted to look at it as like, look, not all of the infrastructure we need is related to people that already live here. I shouldn't have to pay the burden of the additional infrastructure because of these new people coming in. They need to pay their fair share because they are impacting the roads that we drive on. They're the reason we need new capacity, right? So in order to get Measure A, you also had to participate in the TUMF. So that was kind of the stick and carrot to get them to participate. And so a Nexus study is required has to be updated at least every 5 years. Now, TUMF is only applied to new development. So this is paid by the builder. And so it is not a tax paid by an individual taxpayer directly. It's obviously, the builders are going to pass that on as part of the cost of the home. However, the market usually dictates what the price is going to be anyway. So the price to build is the price to build, and the price to sell is whatever the market's going to allow them to get. But if you sell an existing home, you don't have to pay TUMF again. You only pay TUMF for a new home, because if you're selling an existing home, obviously someone's moving in, someone's moving out. It's a wash in terms of additional impacts. The current TUMF rates are $10,104 per single family dwelling unit, $6,580 per multifamily dwelling unit. For retail development, it's $7.72 per square foot of building space. For the service land use type, it's $4.89 per square foot. Industrial, which is warehouses primarily, that can also be manufacturing, is $1.86 per square foot. And finally, Class A and B office space is $2.45 per square foot. And so this money that's collected, it's collected by WRCOG either directly, or some cities collect it and then pass it forward to WRCOG. But in Calimesa's case, the developers actually go directly to WRCOG and pay their fee directly to them. So 45.7% goes towards what is called regionally significant transportation improvements, and this is administered by RCTC. So 45.7% of the money that's collected is sent to RCTC. And this is for improvements to the arterials of regional significance on the regional system of highways and arterials. And so Calimesa actually received $5.2 million in funding from this program last year for the realignment of Calimesa Boulevard as part of the Cherry Valley Boulevard interchange projects. And so, again, we're going to talk about that in a future episode. Another 45.7% is allocated to the zone in which the fee came from. So this goes to arterials also listed in the regional system of highways and arterials, but it stays in the zone that it came from. And there are 5 zones. There's the pass zone, which is what we are a part of, along with Beaumont, Banning, and the surrounding unincorporated areas. So Cabazon, Cherry Valley. The northwest zone, the southwest zone, the central zone, and the Hemet-San Jacinto zone. So 45.7% of the money goes to that. 3.13% goes to the Riverside Transit Agency for regional transit improvements. So obviously, transit is a part of it, but only 3.13% of it goes towards actual development of additional transit. And by the way, Calimesa is represented on the RTA board by Councilmember Linda Molina. 1.47% goes towards the Western Riverside County Regional Conservation Authority to mitigate the impacts of TUMF transportation projects. And by the way, the representative on RCA, which is the Regional Conservation Authority, Calimesa's representative is Council Member Jeff Cervantes. And then finally, the remaining 4% goes to WRCOG for administration of the TUMF program. So a developer can either pay and they pay the TUMF when they get a certificate of occupancy for that building. And some people will argue that the developer should pay way before that. They should build the infrastructure ahead of time. And because of the speculative nature and the volatility in the development cycle, that does prove to be financially unfeasible. It really does. And we've seen that in action with the Oak Valley saga that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. But there's two ways that a developer can satisfy their obligation. They can obviously pay it, or they can enter into what is called a credit agreement in lieu of paying the TUMF. And so what that means is that developer pays for improvement eligible for TUMF funding, and then developer gets a dollar-for-dollar credit against their TUMF obligations for monies paid towards that improvement. So, for example, the Cherry Valley interchange, we do have a credit agreement with the developer of the residential development of Summerwind Ranch. So for every house that he builds, he owes $10,104 per house. But then instead, so that obligation is calculated, but then he's paid towards the improvements at Cherry Valley, not the traffic signals. This is for the ultimate improvements where we're actually going to rebuild the interchange. We're just entering into the plan specifications and estimates phase, which is basically engineering design. We've got through environmental, we got through the project study report. So all those costs incurred went towards was paid for by the developer of the residential portion of Summerwind Ranch. And I think that the important thing to distinguish there is that when a developer enters into a credit agreement and they're not sending that money to TUMF, obviously that means 100% of their money is going towards that improvement rather than that split that I was talking about, the 45.7% and the other 45%, 7%, and et cetera. So, there is an argument to be made. You try to enter into a credit agreement so all of that money stays in your city rather than being divvied up in all these different ways. That doesn't always work in all cases, but in this case, it made sense. So how is TUMF money used? The RCTC portion is they do a call for projects periodically to fund eligible projects, which is how we got the $5.2 million for the Calimesa Boulevard realignment at Cherry Valley. The zone portion is set by the executive committee members that represent the various zones. And so Calimesa actually has 3 projects programmed in the zone, what they call the Transportation Improvement Plan, or TIP. It's a 5-year plan. We have $1.5 million program for County Line Road interchange improvements, $2.1 million towards the Cherry Valley Boulevard interchange, and that's over and above the credit agreement that we have with the residential developer. And we have $8 million programmed for the Singleton Road interchange, and that will allow us to add not only add the missing ramps, but also realign Singleton or Calimesa at Singleton Road. So the Nexus study that I mentioned before that kind of determines what the fees are, it looks at the TUMF network project list. And this is a very high-level, rudimentary way to look at it, but it looks at basically the project list. It looks at interchanges, which are either new interchanges or rebuilds of existing interchanges, new roads, expansions of existing roads. It looks at transportation needs, and then it calculates the cost of those items and how much is attributable to new development. Obviously, there is going to be a benefit to existing people as well. So they kind of do a comparison as to what's new development, what's attributable to new development, what's attributable to what's already there. So because development shouldn't pay for 100% of it in some cases. In some cases, they should. Then they use the Southern California Association Government, or SCAG, demographic projections to estimate future development. And that information is then used to calculate the required fee to pay for development's impact on our transportation infrastructure by type. And so this is a very high level. And so the reason I'm bringing this up, the whole reason I'm actually even mentioning this, is because they are undergoing a new update to the Nexus study, and it's available for public review and comment. So I put a link in the show notes so you can read the whole thing, and you can also submit comments. WRCOG will be doing an informational meeting this coming Tuesday, June 4th at 1 p.m. And that's the real reason that I wanted to bring this up now, is because I wanted to give the public a heads up that this is coming before it actually happens, so that you have an opportunity to go and check that out. So I have a direct link to the Zoom link for that meeting, but I also have a link to the studies and documents section of WRCOG's website, which has the information for the program. It has a link to the study. It also has links to previous studies that they've done, all the way back to the very first study done in 2002. So public comments must be submitted to WRCOG by Monday, June 10th at 5 p.m., and those public comments will become part of the record and will be submitted along with the Nexus study when it comes up for approval by the WRCOG Executive Committee. So they've already reviewed this. They reviewed it before it got released for public comment, so they didn't vote on it yet. They just got to review it. And they said, yep, go ahead, send it to the public, let them take a look at it. It's a 30-day review period, and then it'll come back for consideration at a future time. I'm not sure exactly when that is. They may have that information when you look at the informational meeting on Tuesday. And so the calculated rates in this latest Nexus study, I'd said that for single family, the current rate is $10,104. The fee would go up to $15,025. For multifamily, it would go from $6,580 to $7,588. That's $7,588. Retail would go from $7.72 per square foot to $10.88 per square foot. The service land use type would go from $4.89 to $9.47. And finally, industrial would go from $1.86 to $2.26. So that is what's in the Nexus study, and it's a very long document. It's a very detailed document, and so it may make more sense to go to the informational meeting. They may provide a lot of the information that I've given you in today's program, but I think it's important that you have kind of the background, and I just wanted to give you that backdrop of not only the TUMF, but how it kind of is a part of a bigger piece of different types of transportation funding that we get. And that's out there. And yet that's still not enough. I mean, if you look at Cherry Valley, we're going to talk about that again. The current estimate is $60 million. That could go up as we go through the PS&E phase and we get costs locked in. Costs for construction have been going up dramatically. And so that will be a factor, and that will, may affect the estimate of what we have to get for Cherry Valley. And so as you're going to find out, we probably only have about roughly half of the money secured. We're going to have to go out and get a big federal grant to do the rest of it, because there's just not going to be enough development money to cover that. So again, I'm probably getting into too much detail on that, because we're going to get to that at a future time. But that's going to do it then for this episode of the Calimesa Insider Podcast. Again, remember, our council meeting is this Monday at 6 p.m. You can watch it live or on YouTube, or better yet, you can attend in person. So we always encourage people to do that. And you can always go and do a public comment is there. You have 3 minutes to make a public comment on either things that are on the agenda or if they're not on the agenda. And the big item again on the agenda this coming Monday is the fiscal year 24-25 budget. So we hope that you'll pay attention to that, but we will talk about that next week. Actually, I'm going to talk about some of the elements of the budget once it's approved on next week's episode. Remember to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss the latest episode. Simply subscribe on your favorite podcast app or search Calimesa Insider on YouTube and subscribe there. Whatever your preference is, you can do that, whatever you choose. So until then, have a great weekend. I will talk to you again next week. Take care.